All right, this is Primary Stages Off Broadway Oral History Project. Interview number 4. We are talking to Robert Kalfin. Today's date is Wednesday, July 9, 2014. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to do this because it's a subject that is dear to my heart. I just want to give you a quick overview so you can understand why everything I did came about.
Sure.
Okay. I was very fortunate in my undergraduate theater work. I went to a small university in upstate New York called Alfred University. This was in the, I don't know, 50s, I guess. And it was a small two-man theater department. And the work they were doing in this theater department was Brecht, Girardot, Anouilh, Chekhov, Shakespeare, obviously, all the major hot European playwrights. And as Brecht plays were translated, they were doing them for the first time in this university. I also was, I think they did one of the first productions of Under Milk Wood, things like that. And what was also interesting about that environment was that they were doing environmental productions, proscenium productions, Russ productions. I was in a production of Androcles and the Lion, which was done in this huge gymnasium to turn it into a Roman arena. I was in a production of a Greek play, Alcestis of Euripides, which they used the basketball court as the design for the production and the markings on the floor. So I had a very different background in theater to the colleagues I encountered when I went to Yale. When I got into the Yale Drama School, 1954, most of my colleagues had been doing knockoffs of Broadway comedies in college. They didn't have this kind of European international background. They knew about Shakespeare, of course, So that was my theater background. And when I came to the theater with this whole European thing, when I got out of the drama school, Yale, and this was 1957. This was an extraordinary time in the American theater because the idea of nonprofit subscription theater with seasons of plays that were paid for in advance by a subscription audience and grants and etc. had been seeded by the Ford Foundation with seeding 11 regional theaters in an effort to decentralize the American theater. That's the only thing that existed with touring Broadway shows and community theater sort of stuff, except for 9 Events at the Alley, who started early to do with the idea of having a theater serving a community doing the great works, blah, blah, blah.
And this was 54?
That's when I, 54, I graduated in 57 from Yale.
Okay.
So when I got out of school, that was just happening. Mm-hmm. And I had a wonderful, crazy job for a moment then. I was hired to go to a cross-country trip and see what was happening in terms of America with the establishment of cultural centers, which was beginning. This period, the 60s, culture was the hula hoop. It was a fad. And so all of the idea of private, foundation funding and private grants and individual grants supporting the arts was new, and people were building cultural centers in various cities and regional theaters with the idea that this would attract business and make the communities more attractive for those reasons as well. And I was hired by someone to go make this cross-country tour just to see what was going on. There was a stunning theater in Portland, Maine, an Edwardian theater that was to die. It was so beautiful and extraordinary acoustics. And a relative of a relative knew about me and my theater. They said, "Would you like to do this?" That's how it happened. Well, I did a cross-country tour. I wrote it all up. I said, "This is what's going on over the country. You have an extraordinary facility here." They decided to tear it down and put up a parking lot because it would be much more lucrative for them. Mm-hmm. Since then, they've rued the day because they had to build places for this. They got a symphony. There's a theater, a regional theater there now, but I had this cross section. Okay, when I started in the theater in New York, the off-Broadway theater of that day was commercial. There was the alternative theater to Broadway was commercial off-Broadway. A 3-penny opera production, Hotel. And what were the plays that we were doing in New York off Broadway? The things I was doing in college, Beckett, you know, Anouilh, Girardot.
That wasn't commercial.
No, these were commercial productions in New York off Broadway.
Off Broadway. Uh-huh.
And then what happened is, you know, this was called the alternative theater, the alternative to Broadway commercial theater. Then what happened, of course, was, wait a minute, we could do that nonprofit thing in New York too. So the commercial alternative off-Broadway theater adopted the mode of nonprofit incorporation, subscriptions, and having seasons. And so my theater, Manhattan Theater Club, Circle Repertory Theater, it's the MTC I said, Circle and Square, that was again the famous Circle and Square production, and again in that period with Geraldine Page and Summer and Smoke. So this transition then happened of saying, hey, we could do that too. We, you know, not just regional theaters, we could do that in New York. And Joe, of course, had been doing free Shakespeare in the park. So this idea of incorporating nonprofit as a theater was what happened then, and that's how we all got started. I can go into more detail,
Okay,
but I want to give you the quick overview, okay?
Excellent. Let's back up for just a second. Where did you grow up?
I was born in the West Bronx.
So you were not foreigner to
No.
New York City?
No.
I mean, did you see plays growing up in the West Bronx and in New York?
No, my family would take me to the opera, to the old man,
right.
to the old man. And they would go to the top horseshoe circle to the furthest thing, and my father would hold on to the back of my pants while I leaned over, trying to see center stage because it was way on the side. And so that of course thrilled me, you know.
Were you in plays in school at all, in grade school?
What happened was that I went to the High School of Music and Art, which then.
Where was that then?
It was in Manhattan, up near City College at 135th Street. It has now became part of LaGuardia.
Right.
The High School of Music and Art merged with the Performing Arts High School, and they became the LaGuardia School. And I was a music major there, and I studied music and composition and theory and blah blah blah.
What was your instrument? Did you have an instrument?
I played piano when I went in, but I also played string bass, and I was in a lot of amateur symphony orchestras at that time, which is what you did. And I had to do some composing. I had to do all this kind of stuff. I don't think I was a great musician, but when I ended up at Alfred University, because that high school, which had a huge art section, had a relationship with Alfred. And what Alfred had was a very famous graphic art, sculpture, painting, and in particular ceramic school at Alfred University. And people went there. There was the science thing, which was doing stuff with ceramics for space and all that kind of stuff, and the art. And in that environment, all of these ceramic artists and sculptors and painters were designing the stage productions, which is very interesting because of what they brought, to molding space and a whole kind of sensibility. And so that's, and what I started in college writing music for plays and doing sound, and then I changed my major about 4 times, but then eventually I was encouraged by the theater department, and eventually in my last, I directed my first play in my last year at college. And funny, it bears a relationship to the play you see me working on. There was a play called Opera by William Saroyan, which is a send-up of opera with a singing gorilla and all this kind of stuff. And it's very like a Marx Brothers thing. I remember you take a fish out of a piano, the sounding money, all that kind of stuff.
Where is Alfred?
Alfred's in western New York State, 70 miles south of Rochester. It's right near the Pennsylvania border.
And backing up just a bit before Alfred, when you were still growing up in New York City, you saw the opera. Do you remember seeing any plays or having any influences?
It was very intense when I was in high school, and what happened is that my family had moved to Westchester while I was in the middle of high school, and I was legally not supposed to be going to high school at the high school in Manhattan, because they now lived in Westchester. But my father had some real estate in New York, and we put that down as my New York address.
Oh,
So I was able to keep going to that high school. You know, I don't remember particularly much, but I mean, I remember, of course, when I got it. I mean, I was just basically going to school, and then I was shipped off to college. So I didn't, you know, and I was just, yeah. I know my activity at that point was mostly music and playing in orchestras in my free time.
so the last couple of years at Alfred, you were bit by the theater bug.
I was encouraged to do everything in school, and
who were those first writers that?
I told you who were Ring Around the Moon and Prank.
Jean-Louis.
There's another one, another writer of that period.
Girardot.
No, there's a wonderful writer with lyric, wonderful. All right, I'll think of his name in a minute. You'll know who it is. Fry.
Yeah, Christopher Fry.
Christopher Fry. These are the writers that, as I said, that I was. I mean, I played in Uncle Vanya in school. You know, as an actor, I played in plays by Irwin Shaw. Anything that was really good theater, they were doing, and it was very exciting to me. Yeah.
And when you left Alfred, then what? First few years out of Alfred.
There wasn't much time between like getting out and going to Yale. I mean, I did summer theater. I directed in summer theaters. I acted in summer theaters.
Where were the theaters?
I directed in a theater called Saranac Lake, New York. I directed in Camden, Maine, and acted in them. And I also was at the Gateway Playhouse in Bellport. Those are 3 theaters where I worked in, and for a whole season, acting and directing.
And in those summer theaters, was there anything memorable about the theater experience, or the plays, or the actors you worked with, or something stick out?
I worked with some wonderful people. I've had some negative, interesting experiences come out of them, which I can tell you about, which are fun, actually. Now I laugh a lot about it. But it was, what we were doing. I was in Anastasia. That was the plays of the.
You were acting in.
I acted in Anastasia. I acted in All My Sons, Arthur Miller plays. I mean, these are the plays I was in, and I even directed The Little Hut. I remember directing a play called The Little Hut. And so there was a wide range of styles of theater that I also was doing, and some of it was arena, some of it was proscenium. I also acted in the Shakespeare Company in Camden, Maine, and that kind of stuff.
And then Yale.
Summer stock, and yeah.
Yale was 3
and
years.
Also, I was I had 4 years in college and 3 years at graduate work.
Right.
And I also would be working in the summer while I was at Yale at Off Broadway theaters. I ran lights. I would, it was crew. I did all those kinds of things. There used to be, again, in this alternative theater period of Broadway, there was a man named David Ross who did Chekhov on East 4th Street. Fabulous productions of Chekhov in a tiny, tiny theater. In fact, I think that's where I first met Gerald Heiken, who played the lead for me in Strider on Broadway. He was in that company. He was part of a group of wonderful actors who'd come from Erie, Pennsylvania, Henderson, Forsyth, and a few other those people. They all had come from the Erie Playhouse to New York. And so I was running live.
Do you remember the name of that theater? The Chekhov
Erie?
Theater? No, the Chekhov Theater in the West 4th Street.
It was just David Ross's theater, but hopefully if you go online, you could find it. It was on East 4th.
East 4th, okay.
Yeah, across from La Mama. But they were wonderful productions, very intimate, I think it was 3-sided arrangements. I mean, we were just having to. I was running lights backstage where someone was walking around stage with a candle, and you had to follow them, and these big old dimmers things, and a wooden board with notches in it, and some cues you took with your rear end because your heads were busy. It was a lot of fun. I I was very lucky in that I had to do every job in the theater at one point, and I encourage that in people now, especially to directors, in terms of communicating with people who are working with them, that You know, I was fortunate. I mean, Yale was a terrible time for me, and I can tell you what that's about. But basically,
what was that period?
well, first I'll finish the good thing about Yale. I mean, the good thing was that you were forced to do everything as a director. I had to design sets and draw them and draft them. I had to design costumes and make them. I had to do lighting plots. Design. You had to do it, and of course, then in communicating with people when you're a director, you know what they have to do to get what you're after. It's very helpful for you to know what they have to do their job. So I was very fortunate about that. I was going to be thrown out of Yale. They threatened not to give me my degree.
Because who were your teachers? Before we get to that, who were your teachers there?
The teacher I learned the most from was a woman named Connie Welch, who was a great acting teacher. Dan Lauria, who's a friend of mine, the actor, studied with her as well outside, and a lot of people. And I realized when I was at Yale, and there was a guy named Leo Lavandero who taught playwriting, who was very good, but otherwise it was a very strange time. Brustein later told me that there was rampant anti-Semitism going on at Yale at that time. I had no idea. I just thought, it feels weird. What is it? Am I not good enough? Is there something wrong with my work?
And so they threatened to throw you out.
Well, in my second year of Yale, I had gotten very interested in Brecht, and I read about all of his rehearsal techniques and things that he did, and I wanted to try them out. And so I experimented with them, and I learned a lot of stuff from some of my work. And I had selected I was given the main big theater for my thesis production, and I had chosen to do the Caucasian Chalk Circle. And I was brought into the dean's office and told that if you do that play, by that communist, we will not give you your degree. These were the times. Okay.
What year was this?
57.
57.
Yeah. So I achieved my revenge, and I did a humongous production. I think it was 4 hours long. An expressionistic play by Carl and Joseph Chapek, if you know R.U.R. or the Insect Comedy or the Macropolis Secret. And it was a play called Adam the Creator. It's very pertinent now, as a matter of fact. Adam the Creator is the story of a man who is so unhappy with the way the world has evolved that he decides to destroy the planet. He blows up the planet. That's the first, it's a very good sound cue to that. And as a punishment, he said, okay, you do it over again. Recreate the world that you would like to have. If you had been so unhappy, what would you do? 3 times during the course of the play, he creates a world and has to destroy it. It's just not working out. It's also a comedy. Had Carrie Nye in it. I don't know if you know the actress Carrie Nye. She was at school with me at the time. She had a wonderful entrance in that play. At one point, he tries to create an ideal woman for himself. And through a trap in the floor, you saw an arm come up like this with a very long cigarette holder and a cigarette. And she continued to rise. And he said, "What's your name?" And she said, "Call me Enigma." That's all. Don't forget that part. Carrie was wonderful. Anyway, so the play ended up, it's a huge production, expressionistic theater. And it ended up with a war between the poets and artists and philosophers and the robot technical people. He wrote R.U.R., which is also about robots. So it was this whole thing about technology and philosophy and the soul and what technology does, which is now, there's a young director I know who said he just made a contemporary adaptation because of computer and he loved it. So a young director who is very talented. So that was my revenge production. I had the main stage, and I just took full advantage, and I did this huge thing.
And then you graduated.
Then I graduated, and I had usual kinds of odd jobs. One of the most humorous one, which was working at a television station in Newark, New Jersey, Channel 13, for a children's show, which featured a chimpanzee. The chimpanzee was named J. Fred Muggs. I don't know if they get in trouble.
J. Fred Muggs became famous
Yes, J.
on the
Fred.
Today Show.
Yes. Now I'll tell you, I don't know if I don't want to get in trouble with this. J. Fred Muggs was a chimpanzee. He had these two guys who were his parents. I think they were an item. And they were not very nice. They would not allow the chimpanzee to do anything spontaneous. The chimp was only allowed to do the things they would taught him to do on cue. And this poor animal was like in a prison and terribly neurotic. When you talked to him, he'd start shrieking. If you spilled water, he'd start shrieking and jumping. He was and the job was to make him funny every week on the kids show. And we would have production meetings once a week. I was a production assistant, and the chimp would sit at one end of the table with a crayon and a big yellow pad. We all sat there with our yellow pads. How can we make the chimp funny? And I came up with an idea, which they did do, and I was very proud of it, because I had to look at what the chimp was taught to do, and then work it into a scenario. And a chimpanzee's feet are like human hands. They don't look like human feet. It's like another set of hands. So I developed, and then one of the things the chimp did was he'd sit with a cigar in his mouth and puff a cigar. So I created a piano competition in which there was this wild, mad piano concerto, and the chimp with a cigar in his mouth was had his feet up. So it worked.
And this was a TV station in New Jersey?
It was NET,
In Channel 13?
Channel 13, but it was based in Newark. I think QXR's now saying they're also based in Newark, I don't know.
WNET.
Yeah, so that, maybe those same studios.
And then, what was New York City like at that time? So that was 1959, 60?
1959. Nothing, as I told you, it was this fervid off-Broadway movement. I did my first...
Where were you living? What was your first address here?
I lived for a short time in a building that my father had, some real estate, had an apartment then, and then got moved in with my partner, and we had an apartment on 18th Street for 3 years, and then moved to where I am now in 20th Street.
West 18.
US 18.
West 18.
In Chelsea, yeah.
Right, and then you moved to what?
To West 20th Street, where I've lived ever since 1960.
Oh, great.
Okay.
West 20th, if you don't mind my asking, just so I get a sense of the neighborhood.
No, between 8th and 9th.
Between 8th and 9th.
And I will tell you a few more things you might enjoy. I directed my first commercial production, my first professional production off Broadway in 1959. And like other people have done ever since and continue to do, you get a group of your theater colleague friends together who you went to school with, people you know, playwrights, blah, 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 what can we do? And George Morfogen and I had been classmates at Yale. And 1959, and again, this has to do with something also that I guess I got to bring to the table. I told you the kind of theater I was exposed to in college, and the kind of theater that was going on in New York. And also when in the 60s, when this cultural center business was starting, and Herbert Blau and Jules Irving were brought from San Francisco to run Lincoln Center, with the Lincoln Center Theater being the idea of it, building the equivalent of the British National in America, doing the great plays. That was the idea. And they did an extraordinary play, which I'd love to do. NYU, down where NYU was, they had dug a huge hole in the ground, and they did a kind of, like the Stratford, Ontario Theater. They did Marco Millions, which is a huge, wonderful play about, I'd love to do it again now, because it's basically about Marco Polo trying to teach the Chinese about capitalism. They brought him to be a philosophical thing there, the emperor wanted to hear about Western philosophy and learning it, and he wanted to tell him how to make money. That's what that play is about.
And they dug a big hole in the ground where?
This is right Washington Square South. This is where Lincoln Center first established. They did They did 3 or 4 plays there. Marco Mayans was one of them. David Wayne was in it, I remember. And
Where the church is now, on the south side of the...
no, we're Johnson's. It's just in the middle. It's in the middle of Washington Square South. It's now an NYU buildings there.
Yeah.
But they built this huge thing, which was the prototype for the, like after the Stratford, Ontario.
And this was before Lincoln Center
It
was
was
built.
while it was being built.
While
They formed a
built.
company and were performing there. Okay, I got
And
it.
this was Herbert Blau and
Jules Irving.
Jules Irving.
Yeah,
Okay.
were brought from San
So
Francisco.
your first production.
Oh, my first production. All right. The tradition of theater that I came out of because of what I was exposed to, has to do with theater serving a cultural role, in the sense that, especially the European tradition, if you were an educated person, you had to go to the theater for what you were going to be given by it as a human being, in terms of the world you live in, and relating to the world that you live in, what goes on in the world you live in. 1959, which was, I think, 2 years after I got out of school, was ban the bomb time in New York. And there was all over. Everybody was protesting about use of atomic bombs. And I had read in a poetry magazine a translation of the Golem, which is a long dramatic poem in a beautiful, beautiful English language poetic translation. And the Golem is about this rabbi in 15th century Prague, whose people are being persecuted, and he creates this monster out of clay as a force to use against their enemies. It's also the origin of the Superman story. And the play deals with a moral issue. Is it moral to even use such a force against your enemies? So that's why again, for me, if theater relates to what's going on in the world, that's why I chose to do the Golem. And that's often been a guide for me in things that I want to do and why I do them. They have to be meaningful to your lives, and I want theater to be meaningful to your life. It doesn't mean I haven't enjoyed directing Neil Simon comedies and all that stuff. I love doing it all, and it's great fun for me to just switch and go to another mode.
What was your real estate then? Where were you doing the play?
The Golem was done off Broadway in the St. Mark's Playhouse. George Bofogan and I got our relatives to put up $12,000 for a play with 26 actors that we performed.
A large budget.
Those days it was 12 grand, and all our friends and relatives contributed.
And the St. Mark's Playhouse is still, what is the St. Mark's Playhouse
I don't know if it's
today?
still there on the corner of 8th Street and 2nd Avenue.
Okay.
It was upstairs. It was run by a man named Harry Baum and his lady friend, name I can't remember right now.
Did you set this up as a commercial production? This one?
At that time, it was the only model.
Yeah.
There was no other. We didn't know about the nonprofit mode. And then what happened with me? Okay. I told you about. Okay, so now I had been exposed to the whole idea of nonprofit theater and nonprofit funding, and that could be done in New York. On the street where I live in Chelsea is a church where the Atlantic Theater Company now has its base. That Atlantic Theater Company's space was a kind of gymnasium, social hall, which belonged to the church next door. And I wandered down the street, and I said, gee, that's an interesting space. I wonder if something could be done in there. And I went into the church, and over the altar there was a huge Jesus, stark naked with full genitalia exposed, hanging over the altar. I think it even had pubic hair pasted on it. And the sermon was, Jesus was also a man. And I said, I bet I can start theater here. So I proposed starting, doing readings basically
In that space.
in the space where Atlantic Theater Company is now.
And you said there was the church, but then there was a social hall.
The social hall is where the Atlantic Company is now.
Okay.
That was, it was like a gym basically. This is all in the book you saw.
Now, this was after, just so I want to get this in order, this was right after your production of the Golem.
It was a year or
At the
two.
St. Mark's Playhouse or somewhere in that
Yeah, it was in the
neighborhood.
60s, you know, and as you saw by the back of the book, I think we did like we had movable platforms and we were able to configure the space differently. And what we did was a huge amount of readings of plays, but basically they were readings on your feet with book in hand, with the actors practically improvising their staging because it was very simple, but it wasn't really rehearsed very much. It was just they would read scripts and basically, and so we would do like 26 plays in a month, and then in a month later we did another 26 plays.
26
well, here,
plays?
if you look at the back, you'll see.
Yeah.
Just look at the first year, you'll get an idea. Anyway, we did huge amounts of stuff, and
Now, was this the Chelsea Theater Center at that time?
this was established then as the Chelsea Theater Center at St. Peter's Church in Chelsea.
Okay, are we nonprofit yet, or we're still
Yes,
not
yes,
making
but
that
then we had figured out and gotten into 501c3, and I don't remember exactly, the timing of that, but what happened is, again, it's like an echo of what happened with me at Yale. We did a lot of readings, and there was a play by a famous jazz musician named Archie Shepp, who was a saxophone player and brilliant writer as well. It was a play called, at that time it was called The Communist. And we did a reading of that play. It was basically a play about a young African-American man graduating from school and entering America, and what are the opportunities and what are the things he has to deal with. It was a satire. And they were very upset that we did that play and we had to leave the church.
And what was it about that offended?
Again, it was called The Communist, I don't know, but we had to leave. We then moved to the church on 28th Street and 9th Avenue called the Church of the Holy Apostles, which we eventually called the Church of the Holy Impossible, but we were there. And it's now the gay Jewish synagogue, which is crazy and those other things. But basically, and it's still a church. But we ended up doing there. We did I think we did one play in Spanish at one point. We were trying to. We didn't charge. Everything was free. And then we did a full production of The Communist there, and that was it. The bishop said we had to leave. I had a lot of meetings with bishops in the Episcopal Church at this time.
So you had 1 year at the 20th Street.
I had
and
to
then
look
you
in the
moved
back
on,
of that
yeah, and
book.
then you moved on to 67 was your third season. You moved on to the Church of the Holy Apostles.
That's right, yeah.
All right.
And we were there again for however long it was. And Oliver Ray, do you know who Oliver Ray was? Oliver was, one of the founding board members of the Guthrie. And he somehow, I don't know how, and I at that point had gotten a managing director who was Michael David. He was at Yale, and I don't know how, but we had talked, and Michael had also been trained as a set designer at Yale. And Michael came, and then there was another person called Burl Hash, and we were a three-headed, well, you've seen it in the book. Basically, I was the artistic director. Michael was the managing director in terms of dealing with everything, let's say, from the current line out, subscription, fundraising, blah, 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 blah. And Burl was the production manager dealing with the mechanics, the physical production for everything. Those are the three-headed things. But again, they were not just pigeonholed in their jobs. Michael had wonderful ideas about plays we could do, and I think it was his idea that we do the Beggar's Opera, which was a huge success. And then I did the sequel to the Beggar's Opera, which people don't know, and it's a delightful play. It's a battle between pirates and Indians, and they have a sing-off war. It's like a John Gay.
But early on, and I noticed that most of these are New American plays.
Yes.
You were not doing readings of European
No.
plays at that time.
No.
But most of those were book in hand readings. When was the first production?
Well, first, there was a production of a Spanish play, I think it was Las Ventanas, which we did in the church. That we did in the actual church of Holy Apostles. A cousin of mine who worked for ABC TV worked out a system where the stained glass windows would go away and lights would swing out and then they'd disappear. But doing theater in the church was subject to funerals and weddings and the last minute cancellations.
And what was the off-Broadway landscape surrounded you like at that time? Can you give us a picture of that? I mean, who were your, not competitors, but your alternative
this was
theaters?
Bob Moss.
He was just getting started with
We were all doing this at the same time. Bob Moss, a little bit later, Lynn Meadow. Circle Rep was important. Certainly the Circle in the Square was going, down on Sheridan Square before they built the big theater.
Right.
And so this was the world at that time. What happened was that we were invited to be the resident theater company at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, along with 3 dance companies.
And that was in your fourth season?
Yeah, Alvin Ailey and Luke, I can't remember, a few others, major choreographers. Harvey Lichtenstein was basically a dance buff, and he loved dance. And we converted the upstairs lecture hall into a theater at BAM.
And why were you invited? Aside from the fact that who
Because
took note of your work?
I think it was Oliver Ray who made this introduction for us. And that's how it happened. I don't know what his connection was with BAM, but he knew Harvey Lichtenstein.
So in the Church of the Holy Apostles, about how many productions did you do there?
I think only 2 full productions, but they did a lot of readings. I'd have to look back myself because it was, I've done a lot of stuff. It kind of blends after a while.
Yeah, sure.
And I've done twice as much since all of this, so it's like with somebody else long ago.
All right, so you're at BAM now.
And at BAM, we had great success. The whole thing was people were terrified to go to Brooklyn. And the neighborhood was very, very, very dangerous. I remember when we were doing, I think it was the Beggar's Opera at BAM. We had a lot of transfers to off-Broadway, to commercial off-Broadway from our nonprofit theater in those days.
And those commercial transfers, because I want to go back to that for a second, but those commercial transfers were transferring to what theaters off-Broadway?
Small off-Broadway theaters.
Well, what were they? Were they the ones that are still around now?
Some, yeah.
Astor Place and...
Yeah, I have to look up which ones they were. There were so many more. There was one up around 34th Street where the Beggar's Opera went. Right, near Macy's. I can't remember now where it was. They're all gone now, these theaters, but there were a lot more opportunities than there are now.
And when you transferred, it was usually to a 200 and up seat house?
Yeah, it was around 200 seats. Again, I have to tell you that what I was able to do was a weird anomaly. What the Chelsea Theatre Center was about, and always you have to write your mission statement, and what is the purpose of what you're doing and why you exist. The mission statement, which I came up with, which was very useful, was we will do whatever nobody else is doing and what we think people ought to see. That gave me great leeway. So I would do, my God, there's this great German classic called The Prince of Hamburg, which everybody says is the German Hamlet, and no one in America has ever seen it. The Goethe House was very interested in having us do that play. Frank Langella pursued me when he heard I was doing it. He tracked me down and said he wanted to play that part. And so we did The Prince of Hamburg, which was then picked up and done on PBS and Native Theater in America City. But it was done as a big epic movie with horses and that. Again, we did a bare stage production. It was done as a huge, we shot it in 8 days in Biltmore in North Carolina. We were, I did some of the great works that the Royal Court had done and had not been done in America. Some of those great British writers. We did their plays along with American plays. The idea for Yentl came about because Philip Himberg was an intern in my theater, as was Julie Taymor, by the way. Philip came and said, there's this great story by Isaac Singer, I think it'd make a great play. And I read it, and I said, you're absolutely right, and I contacted a dear friend of mine from college who was a playwright, who I thought would have the right sensibility to tune into it, and we met with Isaac Singer. By the way, I also met with Levick, who wrote The Golem. He was the original author of The Golem, and he was in his 80s at the time. And dear man, lovely. And I commissioned an English language version of that from Ruth Wolfe, who was a colleague from Yale, playwright. Anyway, we worked with Singer. Singer had tried to write his own screenplay version of Yentl, which was about this fat. He didn't know how to write a movie. But he gave it to us. And Leon Applin and I improvised scenes together, and we created the script of Yentl. And Yentl was picked up by Cheryl Crawford, who fell in love with it, the producer. We went to the Walnut Street in Philadelphia, and Barbra Streisand appeared in the sense of saying that she had bought the rights for $15,000 from Mr. Singer, which, no, he hadn't told us. And he was trying to stop the production. And we had not only gotten it up, but we had got it. We were going to move it to Broadway. And I had a wonderful agent at that time named Lucy Kroll, who worked it all out. I met with Miss Streisand once. I don't know if she ever saw the play or not. And I started to talk to her about, we rehearsed this, we've got it, we're trying to, fuck off! That was her answer. That was my encounter with Miss Streisand.
And this was Tova Feldshuh, John Shea.
It was her, and John Shea, yeah, and it was Tova's first job. Now, both Tova and Barbra Streisand were frightened about what Yentl was about. Again, what I try to do is tune into what's going on. This was in the 70s. What Yentl is really about has to do with the attraction of souls to each other beyond gender. So we have the story of a young girl who disguises herself as a boy because she wants to learn, falls in love with a boy who falls in love with her, sort of, but he doesn't understand it because she's a boy, and he doesn't know why he's having these feelings for a boy. And he's in love with a woman that he was not allowed to marry, so she marries the woman that he was, so he could be with her. And she finds herself responding to what the woman is giving to her, and emotionally attacking it. What is this? I'm having these feelings for a woman. And eventually it builds to a climax where the facade can't be kept up anymore. So this dealing with what Singer called the divine androgyny of the soul was what both Streisand and Tova were afraid of lesbianism. So they were very, my big problem with Tova in that play, which is all written about, you probably read about exposing her breast, because there's a climactic moment where the young man will not believe that she's a woman. No matter what she will say, he will not believe that she was. And finally, this Orthodox religious Jewish girl had to go, look! And no matter how I would stage it, Tova would end up with her dad ass down stage center with the young man going, oi, which was not the moment I had planned. You want to hear more about this?
And so it went from there to Broadway.
Yes.
From Walnut Street to Broadway.
Yeah, wait.
Yes.
I want to finish that part. It was then written into Tova's contract by Cheryl Crawford that she had to do the staging that was required in the text. It was not about sexual things. It was about this poor woman having to do this thing which was so hard for her to do as an Orthodox Jewish girl. Anyway, it was written into the contract, and Tova still would not show. No matter how we would stage it, she would end up with her ass down stage center, the boy going, oi. So finally Cheryl Crawford said, tell you what we'll do, we'll make copies of her breasts. We'll make latex copies. Somewhere in my attic I have a mold of Tova's breasts. I plug them in. So they made 200 pairs of latex copies of her tits. And they would only last 2 or 3 performances. They were very friendly. But she still would end up with her ass downstage because they were too realistic. And Cheryl Crawford went backstage, I paid for those fucking 200 pairs of tits, I want to see them. So Anyway, here Kalfin and I continue to be friends. And we did many productions since that. And then years later, she had had a child, and she was no longer flat-chested. And she was voluptuous, and she invited me to lunch with her boobs and the salad plate, saying, here they are, Bob, you can have whatever you want. Anyway, that's the end of that story.
So then, Strider.
Okay, the Chelsea story, you asked about Brooklyn. It was dangerous to go there at the time. People were frightened, and to get an audience to go there. When we did the Beggar's Opera, I remember there were 18th century girls and prostitutes in the play, and we had a bomb scare or a fire scare, and the whole cast had to go in costume and stand on the street. And the local hookers would walk by, seeing these girls in 18th century clothes with their boobs half out, and what's going on? Yeah, it was fun. Anyway, again, Michael and I sort of disagreed eventually about many things. I can go with that personally later, privately if you want to go. But basically, we felt that we had reached a saturation point in trying to build audiences in Brooklyn. We were doing. You have to understand, I was funded by this time 70%, with 30% coming from the box office. So I would do Genèse the screens with 40 actors in a 200-seat house. Everybody always heard of the screens, this famous play by Jean Genet. Well, we should do it, people should see this play in America. We did it. Huge.
Were you the first to do the screenings?
Yeah, the first American production. I didn't direct it, Municipal Anarchist directed it. But it was a humongous production. It was 6 hours long. I think for the matinee, when they had a matinee day, we had to cut 2 scenes. So otherwise the actors didn't have a break. They just had to keep doing it like a movie, continuous movie. But basically, because of the times and the amount of subsidy we were getting, and this couldn't last very long. It was like being a German state theater. Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Brooklyn Borough grant, cultural grants, New York City cultural grants.
Was there any New York State Council on the Arts or the National Endowment?
National Endowment, New York State Council on the Arts, Ford Foundation. I once got a grant from, I think it was a Ford Foundation, for $150,000. They told us. We said, wait, and I kept waiting. Where is it? You said it was coming. And I went, they said, oh my God, here it's on my desk. They didn't mail it. Crazy. But basically, I was subsidized like a state European theater. And so we did that kind of work. And of course, people keep saying, well, why don't you keep doing it? And as the grants began to dry up, we had won all these awards, every award you can imagine, Tonys, Hobies, every one that ever was. It became a little difficult to have to start with the cup in hand to beg to keep doing, which I have proven how many times that we are capable of doing is, and doing this work well,
In '73, you moved to West Side Arts.
Yes, I did. I was trying to have a bigger audience base, and it got limited in Brooklyn to how much people would come and how many can go, and it was 880 seats, I think we had. It's just a lecture hall. So we built the West Side Arts Theater on 43rd Street.
You built that from
It had church. It had been a church long ago, but it had become a club, a dance club, gay dance club, with a lot of drugs and shootings. And the Durst family, which is a big real estate family in the area, owned it.
Still do.
And we proposed to them that we would like to turn it into a theater. They welcomed us with open arms after the murder.
It was upstairs and downstairs?
We built both theaters, the downstairs and the upstairs. It wasn't as glamorous as it is now. Durst has a nephew who's a director who, I think you may know who he is, but basically they had more money to then
Peteristic.
spruce it up and make it, more than we were able to afford in terms of, but we had the 2 theaters, and we produced in both of them. And then eventually we stopped producing in Brooklyn and just were only producing in the West Side. Strider was done on 43rd Street. Biography was done on 43rd Street. And then, Strider transferred to Broadway.
Candide was done on 43rd Street?
No, Candide was done in BAM. And that was a long story. I mean, I can talk about the mentors in my life and the people who influenced me most, if you want to get into that. People who I cared about the most, who encouraged me the most. Everybody loved the music to Candide, but everybody had decided after the 1956 production with a book by Lillian Hellman that it never could work as a piece of theater. And part of the problem with Candide, as it is with any work of that type, which is an episodic kind of structure, just one episode, which you read it usually, if you're reading it, you read it in bits and pieces. They decided it could never be a theater piece. There were many, many concert versions that people would just sing the score. I think Gordon Davidson used to direct a concert version that toured. And I had, in the meantime, done a few productions with Eugene Lee. And I also had some conceptual ideas as a director about how Candide can be made to work physically and effortlessly, given its episodic structure and how it has to build it. They would have 98 tons of scenery and all this stuff. And Eugene Lee had done Slave Ship at my theater, and then I had done also, Michael David knew Eugene Lee, I think, from Yale or something. Anyway, that's how I did. And I also directed another production that Eugene had designed. And so I got in touch with Hal Prince, and I started saying to him, this is such an extraordinary score, this is an extraordinary piece of musical theater, we can't just let it be a record, phonograph record. And badgered him. Hal has written about this in his books as well. And finally, I introduced him to Eugene Lee. I said, I have a few. If I was directing it, I have a few ideas myself. One, what we could do it on pageant wagons. We could do it this way, but I want you to meet Eugene and hear what he has to say. And so Hal finally met Lee, and it clicked. And he then commissioned a new stage version of the book to be written by Hugh Wheeler. And he got Stephen Sondheim to rewrite and write some music. And also we had many meetings with Leonard Bernstein, and Leonard kept taking things out of his trunk that had got some of the same stuff that was in Mass, by the way, in the Bernstein Mass is in Candide. The sheep song in Candide is also in Mass. They never hear the melody. So we created this 90-minute environmental production of Candide. And it was a huge success. It was also very complicated because there were 6 lyricists, and they had to divide 6 percentage points of,
6 lyricists was what?
Richard Wilbur, Stephen Sondheim. There are 3 more others. I have to go look it up. I can't remember. You'll know them all. But they had all written lyrics for this. So and Steve Sondheim had to write some new stuff because of the version. It was a big success. It transferred to Broadway.
What was the first house that it was in?
It was in the Broadway. It was in
before the Broadway transfer.
Yes, it was in BAM. It was at BAM.
You did it at BAM in the lecture hall.
In the lecture hall, in the upstairs.
with all the environmental staging?
Yes.
Well, there was enough room, I guess so.
200 seats, it was 200 seats. You know, with every, it was, the audience sat in all different places and things happened over your head and around you and behind you. Then it transferred to Broadway, did very well, but then the musician, I think it was the Musicians Union that killed it because we did it with 13 musicians and they insisted that we had to have 26. And that was the breaking point in terms of the running costs. So they had to close. After that, the opera houses then became interested in doing Candide, City Center, and Hal did several, and Hugh Wheeler went back and did several. There was some wonderful music which we were glad to have restored to the show. Which we had to cut it in the 90-minute version, and it took 2 or 3 productions until Hugh and Hal worked out a 2-act form. Because again, when you're doing an episodic thing, you can't stop until you get to a point. You have to find a place to stop and then start again, because it just keeps building. Anyway, they finally solved it. It took at least 3 productions in a 2-act version too. And I wrote Hal. I said, finally collected. Hal has always been very wonderful to me, and he's a major influence. Another major influence on me and my work was Wolfgang Roth, who was one of Brecht's designers, and he did many shows with me, including...
Say that name again.
Wolfgang Roth.
Uh-huh.
He was one of Brecht's designers. We did many works with me, and he and I did an Amadeus, which was a totally different concept for doing Amadeus. I did it twice out in big regional theaters, and I was very proud of that work and what we did a whole other way. And I talked with John Schaefer about it, and he said he wished he could have seen it, because it wasn't a distortion of the play, it was just a concept of doing it.
Who were your other mentors?
John Hirsch, who was a Lincoln Center artistic director and Stratford, Ontario director. He was the one, when I was quite young, who became aware of me and encouraged me and recommended me and got me some regional theater jobs, basically. And I directed at his theater in Manitoba Theater Center, and then I directed at other Canadian theaters after that, because one thing led to another. Edmonton, I did 2 productions in Edmonton. I did the Amadeus there, and I'd done a Glass Menagerie there. Cheryl Crawford certainly was. Those are the main people. How couldn't you Cheryl Crawford? She was quite an extraordinary woman, Cheryl Crawford. I was terrified of her until I met her, and then we became very close friends.
And did you work with Cheryl on other things besides?
Yentl? No, but she and I collaborated on ideas. There were some plays we started changing scripts about, and we had some ideas. And I remember working with a playwright who you know. I'll think of his name in a minute to say, I'm sure you've done some of his plays. We wrote a play about a balloonist in, I'm sorry, I can't think of his name right now, but I think you even produced some of his plays, a lovely guy. A play about a balloonist during the Civil War, where there was the idea that you could use a balloon to get observe and see behind the enemy lines. And Cheryl Crawford and I took a balloon trip together. and we had to land it. Somebody said, this usually doesn't happen. This usually happens to the balloon. And we had to roll out of it. Great fun.
So let's go back for a second. Strider was done first at...
Okay. In 1977. I hope you're not bored with all this.
Not at all. It's interesting.
Okay. In 1977, the Soviet Union and the American State Department signed, they were part of something called the Helsinki Agreement, in which for the first time the Soviet Union was going to recognize copyright and recognize American copyright, and in exchange they would copyright their work. And so we could do Russian plays, and they could make money if we did Russian plays and there was copyright protection. And 8 American theater directors were brought to see Russian theater. Myself, Zelda Fish-Handler, Gordon Davidson, Paul Widener, Ed Hastings from ACT, I think, what's his name, Alvin Epstein was along for that trip as well. And we were plied with vodka and taken to see theater day and night for 2 weeks in both Moscow and then in Leningrad. And so Several, I think so. I think the Alley Theater brought a play back, and I brought back Strider, which I had seen in Leningrad. And when I got back, I got very involved with getting an English language version of it. There was a Russian woman I knew who was an opera singer who did a rough English translation for me. And then because the play is set in 19th century Russia and has a certain kind of language style to it, I involved a lyricist friend of mine to create the text in English of Strider. And I also invited there was music in the original production sort of sporadically, and there was opportunity for a little bit more music, and I invited a composer named Norman Gurman to write some additional stuff. And we did the play on 43rd Street, and then some people got very interested.
Upstairs,
Yeah, the big theater.
in a proscenium style.
Well,
Proscenium style.
yeah, it was. I did a very bare stage production, and very intentionally. The Russian production had more stuff in it. Wolfgang Roth designed it, but I even stripped it down further than the stuff that he did. I wanted the audience to be an active participant in using their imaginations rather than giving them everything and literally trying to. I mean, you have a play where people playing horses and people, but alternately going back and forth between being a horse and a person. You have to do something where the audience fills it in and believes it and connects with it. It's sort of a contract. So Strider was done with a pole and a chair and a rope, basically. That was it. And I was very proud that later on, and again, I love theater, which is different than film and TV, because it is this active thing where the audience is doing some work and this contract of believing with you something. And I was very proud when a Los Angeles producer called and asked if we still had all the sets and all the stuff so they could do it in Los Angeles. And I said, "You already have it there. It's in your head."
What was the Metropolitan Playhouse? You worked there several times.
Metropolitan Playhouse still exists. It's an Off Broadway Theater on East 4th Street that does basically revivals of lost and old American plays. I did. I saw that they.
Is it still called the Metropolitan Playhouse?
Yeah. I got involved with them because they were doing a play called The Melting Pot, which is where that phrase came from. And it was by a man named Israel Zangwill. My middle name is Zangwill. I was named after him. And Israel Zangwill wrote in English. He was a Jewish playwright who lived mostly in England, though he later had plays done on Broadway comedies, and he was a man of the theater who did a lot of things. But this is one of his famous plays. His best play is a play called The King of Shores, which is many people have tried to make into American musicals. It's a great 18th century kind of thing. But anyway, I got in touch with the theater and I said, I've always been interested in his work because my family named him that. They so loved his work, they named me after him. And so I ended up doing the production there of The Melting Pot. And then when they were going to do Anna Christie, I became very interested in that. It certainly is a style of work that people wouldn't associate with me, but I had Michael Anania do a glorious theatrical, non-naturalistic production, which was again very evocative, but served the play in a way which was very beautiful and totally not an imposition of style, but supported what the play was about.
And Truly Blessed?
Truly Blessed. Okay. I had an agent who has since become one of my dearest friends, and she was very involved, still is, with a woman who was a fantastic singer, an African-American woman, who is now a superstar in Europe, but nobody knows who she is in this country. It's an American woman who was carrying luggage at Kennedy Airport and driving a cab. And this woman had sung with Duke Ellington and Bob Dylan, and she has this extraordinary voice. She's now in her 70s. And Roseanne Kirk is her name. I'll tell you more about her.
Roseanne Kirk.
Roseanne Kirk, for the last 24 years, has been creating a new show every year featuring this woman. They played for the Pope, they played for the Queen of England, they played for Hillary and Clinton, Bill Clinton. They are a super hit in Europe whenever they appear. And every year she conceives a new show featuring this woman for 24 years. Okay, and this woman, a friend of mine, conceives what the show is going to be about and puts it together and structures and directs it. It's done by this big German company, which is a huge production company that also did the West Side Story in London that won the Olivier Award. And anyway, Roseanne was my agent at the time, and she had an idea that we could do a show about Mahalia Jackson with this woman with this great voice.
Now, just to be clear, the woman with a great voice is
Queen Esther Marrow is her name. And she's the one who's still the star of these European productions right now. Queen can't really act, but she can sing up a storm. She's been in a few Broadway shows. So Roseanne got the idea that we could maybe do this. So she structured a reading which was just of like 6 songs or 7 songs with this woman singing them. And she invited Frankie Hewitt, who was running Ford's Theater in Washington at the time, to come and hear this. And she said, oh, absolutely, I'll do it. And I said, shit, we gotta write a play. We gotta write a show. So she and I together created a kind of overview of Mahalia's life with the highlights and the things she had to deal with. And we did it in Washington at Ford's Theater. We got very, very good notices. And then a Broadway producer decided to bring it to New York and wanted to change it, and we didn't exactly love the changes, but we went along because we wanted it to get to New York, and it came to New York, and it didn't last very long. It wasn't as good as it was in Washington, but he pressed these changes on us. So that's what it was. And
you had 15 seasons with the Chelsea Theatre Center.
Well, I think it was 17 years old.
17
to the last year. I don't know. I stopped counting after one.
I'm sorry, 19 here.
I don't know. I stopped counting. I just got tired of raising money.
Talk about the end a little bit.
In what regard?
Excuse me.
In what regard?
When you finished and you decided not to do it anymore,
when it got to the point where the hula hoop we were riding of this kind of financial support that people were giving to do the work that we were doing, and year after year proving that we do it and winning every theater award you could win, and saying when the grants started to dry up and we became reduced to just doing readings of the things that God to do, it became an emotional thing where you're saying, for God's sake, I've proved it for 15, 17 years. Why do I have to start all over again as though I've never done something? Look at the record of what we've done. How many theaters had X many shows go to Broadway, or long commercial runs off Broadway, one after another, and the range and quality and style of the work of things that we did. And by the way, I was never a director who would be concerned about asking Alan Schneider or Hal Prince to direct in my theater. I'm not threatened. I have enough to do. I can't do everything, and if I get the great, really best people I can get, great. I don't have to do everything myself, and as you know yourself, or as an artistic director, you often end up giving away some of your favorite things you'd like to do because, you can't do everything and time's going by, and so you'll do another one and let somebody else do it. The point is to get it on, So anyway, that's that. So I eventually, Michael David had then left the theater. That was and we continued for a while. I had a few other managing directors, and it just became, the funding basically dried up. And I just didn't want to go back to doing readings of plays that I knew I could do, and I more than had proven I or other people could do with my theater support. So that was it, and then I decided to be a guest for a while. And then I was invited to be the artistic director at Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park, which I did for 1 year. And everybody knew that it would last only a year, and I knew it too, but I did it anyway because they said they wanted to take a wild trip and what would I do and blah, 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 blah. And then I ran a theater in Florida for a little while, which was also doomed because of local politics, but I, did some good stuff there too.
You also had Vanities.
Vanities was a co-production with Playwrights Horizon, and we did it downstairs at Chelsea.
Mm-hmm. And the Chris Durang and Sigourney Weaver doing
I don't even remember.
Das Lustanzia.
You know what? I don't remember all of it.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. Is there anything else you want to say about Off Broadway at that time, or the Chelsea Theater Center that comes to mind, or something we didn't cover?
No, I mean, the fact that theater has always had to have a life of success financially to exist. Whether it was Shakespeare's company or even the great subsidized theaters in England or Germany or other countries where there is a state support for a certain kind of level and kind of work. The thing that happened in this country was the weird intermarriage of the entertainment industry with theater. So the role of theater becomes confused with the entertainment industry. And the measure of success may not necessarily be the performances or the quality of the work, but how many asses there are in seats. And if you don't get the asses, it closes. While in the subsidized situation is, when we did Candide and it moved to Broadway, I said, I better do some weird German play that everybody's going to walk out of after the first act, because they're going to expect that we're going to keep doing plays to get a commercial transfer, and that's not what we're here for. So this is a kind of innocence that I had, this intermarriage, this intertwining of the entertainment industry. No one in the Olympics will judge someone throwing the discus against someone being a swimmer. But in the Tony Awards, you put an actor who's done this extraordinary kind of performance in one kind of work against another actor who's done a totally different kind of story performance, and one of them wins. It's not an athletic competition. It's about it's about being a distinguished artist and being awarded the distinguished work you've done. And there can be 5 or 6 people who get a distinguished art award, because how do you compete somebody in this kind of a movie against someone in that kind of a role in another movie, which is a totally different kind of work? So this is a cultural phenomenon that and it certainly has become about marketing. As I said, if somebody brought you the script of Hamlet, it was a new play, you'd say, how can I sell this? Who would do this play? How can I market Hamlet if you never heard of it? Who would want to see it?
All right. What do you think the future is going to be of the Off-Broadway movement, given that?
There will continue to be people who get out of school and say, I don't give a fuck, I'm going to do this stuff and I'm going to get it on. And I'll get my uncles and my aunts or somebody to give me some money, or we'll do it for nothing and we'll do it in a shirt. But the other thing that happens, there's a difficult thing. Everybody does stage readings, and I get invited to 20 a night. You've seen some of the ones I've done. Sometimes it ends up being an end in itself, and it feels like, oh, we've done that. It's at 3 reading, let's do something else. And it's like the play's been done. It's never been done. But I know how long it takes a play to get to Broadway. Have you seen Gentleman's Guide?
Yes.
What did you think of it?
I loved it.
I thought it was the best thing I've seen here. Yeah. And yet they're saying that it's having trouble. There is not much of an audience that gets the style of what it is about and what it's doing. So there's something that's happened in terms of a gap of knowing what that theater tradition has come out of and how brilliantly they've taken it and used it and modernized it, and it still works, it's related to something, there's a gap. And so it's hard. On the other hand, we keep reinventing ourselves. There's nothing new under the sun. And if something is original enough and daring enough and takes enough risks, it might have a commercial life because it's different and nobody's seen it before. That's the only ray of hope. I hope I haven't depressed you.
Not at all. Excellent. Very good.